We have a lot of documents come out today. The Balance Dataslate, new points for your units, unit changes, faction changes, legend units updated for the Adepta Sororitas, that's an interesting one, and a lot of frequently asked questions have become real in a document. So we also have the updated rules commentary, and we have an update for the Pariah Nexus mission cards, and most importantly, big changes for the core rules of the game. So the biggest thing for everyone are these changes to the core rules, which can make it feel like you're playing a whole new version of Warhammer 40,000 instead of just 10th edition. So we'll talk about the main changes first. These core changes are for everyone. If you couldn't find where these rules are because Games Workshop didn't link it from their article or their YouTube video, it's in a document called the Core Rules Updates and Rules Commentary. Previously this was just called the Rules Commentary, but now it has official updates for the main rulebook. Tank Shock, one of the core stratagems in the main rulebook, is now based on toughness, not strength. This is a bigger hit to light vehicles like the Penitent Engine and the Paragon Warsuits, as we are not tank shocking and rolling 14 dice. Excuse me as I scream into the void after I've just completed recording a very long and heavily researched video and now needs to re-record a lot of those parts. The bulk of the tank matters for Tank Shock. This is more like how it should be. The super heavies are the best vehicles to use tank shock on, but still no love for monsters being able to use this stratagem. It's vehicles only. The grenade stratagem has changed so you can no longer advance or fall back and use grenades, so it's much more like a standard weapon. And heroic intervention has changed. This was a very underused stratagem, because at 2 command points and then you get no charge bonuses, it wasn't doing a lot for people unless you also had fight first. It's now been reduced to 1 command point. Games Workshop made no mention of it in their video or article. You have to do a deep search of all the documents to find out things like that. Don't get caught out. The app will update soon enough if you have the Warhammer 40,000 app. There's quite a few changes to stratagems. Those are the stratagems themselves. Abilities that let you use stratagems for free are no longer limited to battle tactic stratagems. This was an update to the rules in 2023, and it was unevenly distributed. Some detachments had maybe 1 battle tactic, while the Army of Faith for the Adepta Sororitas has 4 battle tactic stratagems, and the Bringers of Flame detachment has 5. Instead, any ability that lets you use a stratagem for free now disappears from that datasheet and is replaced by a rule that says that you can use stratagems, any stratagem, for 1 command point cheaper. So a 2 command point stratagem now costs 1 command point for any stratagem. You can have grenades for free. There's another change to make rules where you can use a stratagem a second time in the phase disappear. So no doubling up on stratagems. To put these rules together, the Space Marine Captain doesn't give a battle tactic stratagem for free, and you can use a battle tactic stratagem even if another unit has already used that stratagem this phase. Now he just lets you use any stratagem on his unit, and it costs 1 fewer command point to a minimum of 0 command points. If you had a unit ability that names a stratagem, like the Reductor Saboteur ability Primed and Ready that lets her use the grenade stratagem a second time, that still works as it is written. So the Bomb Lady can still grenade even if other units in the army have grenaded that phase. And it's now much harder to increase the cost of enemy stratagems. So if you had an ability that makes stratagems cost more, which was commonly seen on the Calidus Assassin, you can now only use that if the unit that is using the stratagem used it within 12 inches of the assassin. Then that stratagem can be made worse as it will cost 1 command point more for every future use. As the assassin has lone operative, they can be shot before this happens, so we may be seeing Calidus Assassins dropped as they remain the most expensive assassin available to Imperium factions. There's quite a few things with like overhanging units where you have a big model with massive wings, maybe you haven't painted those wings yet, and they're sticking out across the table, off the board edge, or hovering above a part of a unit. There's a lot of different rules relating to them, which I'm not going to go into, to explain when they're still on the board even though part of their wings are off the board, how you can't draw a line of sight from them but enemies can draw distances to them, and how you can engage an enemy in combat even if they have a thing that's part of their model overhanging the model. So much of this comes from a recent tournament when someone had a Grey Knights flyer and it was more than 5 inches above the enemy, so they couldn't engage in close combat even though part of their overhanging model was, but there was a base, so it wasn't. This is complex stuff, and I can't explain it well enough. I'm sorry. There are good rules that I can explain. Movement has changed for units, and it is meant to make it easier for rules inconsistencies on the tournament table, but I'm just looking at this and seeing Warhammer Fantasy Battles in my Warhammer 40,000, with units pivoting and moving and angling and turning. So pivoting is free for units with a circle base. And we have a special clarification on circle bases. The term they actually use is round base, but then they have an additional FAQ to say, when we say round bases, we actually mean circle bases, even though ovals are round. So if it says round bases, it means circle bases. So all the other units, like the knights on oval bases, the ridge runners on an oval base, and rhinos that have no base, if you're going to pivot them, it costs 2 inches of movement regardless of the number of times they swing around in the phase. So if your rhino starts the movement phase pointing forwards and ends the movement phase pointing the same way, all is good. So, I may have missed this being mentioned, but what about the eldar vehicles? The Falcon Grav tank is on a circle base, but it has a projected front which comes out much further than the back. The base is off-center. So they have a round circle base, so their pivot value should be 0, which means you could pivot and gain extra movement. Unless Games Workshop has made a mistake there, and I'm not seeing any change in the June 2024 index version of that unit. The Raiders of the Dark Eldar are the same. They have a circle base, so they have a pivot value of 0. But even if you apply a pivot value of 2 inches, so it costs them 2 inches whenever they want to swing around, the Raider can still get a movement advantage. I measured my Raider, it is 7 inches long. So much like an exploit in other previous editions, you can start the vehicle sideways in your deployment zone, and then move it forward with a pivot, whether it costs 2 inches or not, and you will still have, even including those 2 inches, you'll have gained an extra 1.5 inches at least, from which your models can then disembark. So I just hope I've missed it somewhere, otherwise Games Workshop has gone out of their way to reintroduce an issue from past editions. But hey, Games Workshop are not fully playtesting their rules or not realizing all of the implications of their rules. That's just how it is. And this is not going to be changed for another 6 months. So janky Eldar tactics may be still around for a long time to come. Right, other main rules changes. They also can't seem to decide or understand what they want to do with devastating wounds, and they flip back and forth on this. Devastating wounds are now back to being called mortal wounds, but they're not mortal wounds. They're mortal wounds that specifically do not spill over. Hazardous weapons also fall under this idea of being devastating wounds, but they're mortal wounds, but they don't spill over. So they are still acting the same as devastating wounds, but now abilities that stop mortal wounds, like on the Norn Emissary, will work against devastating wounds. So that's one exploit my Deathwatch have lost from mass combi weapons or from using Kill Team Cassius. I still have a video with a lot of other Deathwatch exploits you can use. Indirect fire. The way that the Imperial Guard functions. I'll get to their specific change later, but this affects all indirect fire weapons, including the Exorcists in particular. So indirect fire rules have now changed. Rather than being -1 to hit, an unmodified roll of 1, 2, or 3, so any dice that's showing a 1, a 2, or a 3 when rolled, they will miss. I was going to suggest having a Seraphim unit sit near a group of 3 Exorcists, then use the Light of the Emperor stratagem from the Army of Faith detachment to have all 3 nearby Exorcists ignore the penalty to their hit rolls. Well, that won't work in quite the same way, but we can still ignore damage modifiers. I will leave more details for a future, hopefully soon, hopefully not too much to re-record, video. Despite this penalty, the Exorcist has gone up by 10 points compared to its previous points listing from Games Workshop, and up by 30 points from the listed 160 points in the Codex. Still not looking great for Exorcists. But we also have a change to transports with the firing deck rule. So units that have already fired their weapons cannot fire them again from the firing deck. This was how it was played by all sensible people, but not the likes of Dr. Krankenfoof. You could, rules as written, fire your Deathwatch Eliminator squad and then make the move from the sergeant having one kind of bolt gun to get inside the transport as they were completing a move. And then the transport could use their guns to fire again, but from the firing deck. So that is not allowed anymore. Those are the main rules changes, the ones you'll come up against the most often. The Pariah Nexus mission deck is going to be replacing the Leviathan mission deck as your competitive game mode, and it already has an errata and FAQ for you to take a pen to use on your new cards and update them. So recovering assets is a secondary, which should not be something that you can take as a fixed secondary. Cowards take fixed secondaries. Random Madness cards is the way to go. I mean, if you want, you can have fixed secondaries if you're tailoring your list to do one particular thing, or if the enemy has loads of characters or a massive amount of horde units. Then fixed secondaries can work. Cull the Horde is a fixed secondary and you get victory points for killing large enemy units. There was a potential tactic where you could deny your enemy victory points by deliberately taking a unit of 19 models instead of 20, but there is a text update to explain that if the cost of 19 models is the same as the cost of 20 models, then your opponent will score victory points as if they were a unit of 20. So this will also imply to Imperial Guard infantry squads they don't get away with it, as their heavy weapons turn 2 models into 1 model, and their rule exception about them, like, it counts as 20 models for picking weapons. The cost of that unit for 18 models is the same as the cost for 20 models, so they will still be affected by Cull the Horde. And this Pariah Nexus Tournament Companion also comes with a set of maps for tournament players to perfectly align their terrain on the boards to one particular shape. Good for them. I prefer crazy terrain, fun things that's in whatever shape depending on what you've got available, and not just cutting out polystyrene cubes to put on bits of cardboard and then going, yep, that's a battlefield because it's tournament ready. We have a lot of army changes. So many army changes. I'm not going to talk about all of them, and I'm not going to talk about all of them in depth because I'm not your designated expert on all factions. No such person exists. So I will talk about some major changes to watch out for in your opponents who have these armies. The Adeptus Mechanicus have got a whole rework, but as I don't have many Adeptus Mechanicus fans who aren't also Bladed Cogs fans, I haven't got much to say beyond, you got better! Thumbs up! Just pretend I did a thumbs up. But the other thing that is up are their points. Adeptus Mechanicus players will let us know in the comments if they think there is a shift in their favour, or if they just have more rules to remember and fewer models to carry. Another change that affects a Genestealer Cult adjacent faction is the change to the Combined Regiment Detachment rule. Oh boy, this is a painful one for what has become known as the Artillery Regiment. Aside from the change to indirect fire, you will now need line of sight to the enemy to activate the rule. So the mortar teams and basilisks have to be able to see what they're shooting at to get lethal hits. The lethal hits from regiment keyword units can't be used against vehicles or monsters, which are the units that you want lethal hits against. In contrast, the really big guns of the squadron units and the smaller guns of the Chimera, which is also a squadron unit, they get lethal hits but only against monsters and vehicles. So aside from your light tanks, these had the big guns to wound those tough targets anyway. Sentinels have regiment and squadron, so they get both. However, I can hear the sound of people rapidly deleting their comments, just edit it instead. Having the comment helps out. There is a big positive. You don't need to stay still anymore. The Imperial Guard can play the movement phase. So I think this will overall be a celebration from most Imperial Guard players. Astra Militarum players, however you want to put it. And what better units are there to fight off the Toughness 5 Green Tide than waves of guardsmen moving up the board and firing with lethal hits? Seriously, there is no better, because your lasguns wound on a 5+, just the same as the Space Marine Intercessor's bolter, and the armor penetration on that Primaris Marine's gun means nothing to the Green Tide's invulnerable save, so the armor penetration 0 lasguns are the more affordable ones. So this is no longer an artillery detachment, and it feels more like a combined arms detachment that it claims to be. None of this affects the Brood Brothers Auxilia for the Genestealer Cult, as they use the Brood Brothers Auxilia detachment rule. not the Imperial Guard index detachment rule. But we can take advantage of a points drop to the Basilisk, the Manticore, and the Field Ordnance Battery, as those points drops don't take the Genestealer Cult into account, and we can exploit that for sneakiness. And the Brood Brothers detachment also requires line of sight to activate, but having big guns isn't bad. Basilisk still slows the enemy. But all infantry Imperial Guard is taking a little bit of a back step. The reinforcement stratagem for Imperial Guard is now once per game, same as the Tyrannid Unending Waves. Any stratagems that give you a new unit identical to a destroyed one are once per game. So some Imperial Guard players that I've fought against were using reinforcement so much that they were bringing back more units than the Genestealer Cult, and that just wasn't right. Those stratagems are once per game, but this does not affect the Genestealer Cult army rule, Cult Ambush. We can still bring back lots of units, lots of times. That green tide I mentioned, which was looking to become the meta, has been toned back a bit. The minor change to the green tide is that it is a 6+ invulnerable save when your unit has 9 or fewer models, and it is only a 5+ invulnerable save when you have 10 or more models in your unit. There is no longer the reroll 1s to invulnerable saves. There's been a few changes to their stratagems to stop guaranteed charges, and rerolls are added instead of flat bonuses to charge moves or horde-like surge moves being a flat 6 inches. This is not going to affect a stratagem for the Adepta Sororitas in the Penitent Host, which allows you to make a surge move, and that happens when the enemy selects their targets, not after they finish shooting. So you can move into combat with the enemy before they've fired. That's still the same for now. And this change also doesn't affect the Xenocreed detachment for the Genestealer Cult, as they have a similar stratagem, and it doesn't affect how the hybrid metamorphs work. If you have auto pistols, then all of the models in your unit can make a horde move of 6 inches. There hasn't been any FAQ to say not any attached characters, so you have to attach a character that has an auto pistol if you want to make a horde move of 6 inches. I have a Metamorphs video to explain how they work in the 10th edition Genestealer Cult Codex. The Meganobs generally, but also in the Bully Boys detachment, they've been toned back as well. They were a staple in the Bully Boys detachment because they got a double WA for knobs, and that's got a toning back as they now have a 5+ feel no pain instead of a 4+ feel no pain during those WA turns. They are still really strong. And although Games Workshop's commenter people were complaining and saying, oh yeah, we know that it's a lot of extra dice to roll, and people think it's annoying because when you have a lot of high damage shots and you have a feel no pain thing, you have to roll each damage roll individually, then roll the feel no pain rolls in response to that, and back and forth and back and forth. And yet their response was not, oh yeah, we're going to remove the feel no pain, it's just we're going to reduce it slightly. Why bring up a problem if you're not going to fix the problem? Feel no pain generally is a rule that feels bad, but it's there. Warhammer 40,000 would probably be better without it. The Necrons, who continue to work incredibly well in the tournament meta, they've had a little bit of a change as well. Their Hypercrypt Legion stratagem, Cosmic Precision, which allows a unit to be set up just over 3 inches from an enemy unit instead of the normal 9 inches, that no longer applies to monsters, so you can't do it with the Catan shards. So that's a little bit of a tweak. But we also have more general tweaks to stratagems that allow your unit to become untargetable. So all stratagems that make a unit untargetable now only work if you're more than 18 inches away, not 12 inches away. So it applies to all stratagems of this kind. We saw it previously with the Chaos Space Marines in their index for Dark Obscuration, but now it applies to all such stratagems. The lone operative rule, as a rule, is not affected, and you can still not shoot lone operatives if you're more than 12 inches away. To aid in that tournament meta against the Necrons, the Wraiths and the Doomstalker have gone up in points. The Doomstalker has been overlooked by Games Workshop for far too long. Its big goodbye cannon is really powerful, so I'm glad they got a points increase. The Tyrannids were not doing well in the meta, not as bad as the Adeptus Mechanicus, but they've had so many changes. More than I'm going to list here. So like the Neurolictor is Synapse, and so is the Broodlord, finally! You know, the one that sort of leads the Genestealer Cult, but it isn't a Patriarch, but it's a Patriarch that leads Genestealers. Now it's a Synapse creature, which it should have been all along. There's also a boost to the Synapse rule. If you are in Synapse range in melee, your attacks gain an extra strength. So that's some impressive extra power that we have to be prepared for, and those synapse units, like the Tyranid warriors with close combat weapons, will give themselves that every single time. That is nasty, so you've got to be aware of it. There are several other changes that are minor, like Neurotyrants being able to join Zoanthropes, but those changes are in the Balance Dataslate for Tyranid players to look up. I'm not a Tyranid player, so I can't explain everything to you on that front. But there is an improvement I want to mention as well to the monster detachment, the Crusher Stampede. Monster units in that will now get 2 more objective control while they're at starting strength, so while undamaged, they're better able to control objectives. I like that, as I was having a similar issue in the Hallowed Martyrs attachment for the Adepta Sororitas. Why would I want a unit to be at full strength? I get no detachment bonuses until I start taking a wound. So this gives Tyranid opponents a bit of a thought. Do I leave the monsters at full strength where they get no bonuses to hit or to wound, but they will have higher objective control? Or do I damage them a bit where they won't have that objective control, but they will have the bonuses to hit and wound? The problem with that is it's entirely in the hands of the Tyranid's opponent. You as a Tyranid player don't get to decide which one you have. And opponents of Tyranids will know you shoot the big ones first, and you shoot them till they're dead. So none of the abilities will apply because it's a corpse. But I like the idea of taking the lesser used detachments and improving them. The reasons that this Crusher Stampede wasn't taken, even if you really loved the monsters, is because a lot of those monsters may have the Harvester keyword, so you're better off in a different detachment. Or you use the Invasion Fleet, where you can have your monsters, which can have a 5+ feel no pain when they're in Synapse range with the Stratagem, and all of your other units that are not monsters will also benefit as well. So they're a codex that's been out a while that's had a lot of changes. This is one of the problems with buying a physical codex. It's gonna be not correct after a few months, and the points in it are immediately not correct. Chaos Space Marines have a new codex, and it's pretty fun. A lot of the detachments really work. Like, I think all of the detachments work, even though I have favorites, which I'll put in another video at some point. So the Chaos Space Marines have had one change to their Warp Talons. They were really powerful as they could come from reserves, charge an enemy, and with the opportunistic Raiders stratagem in the Renegade Raiders detachment, they could then fall back and, using their unit rule, disappear off the board. This let them strike wherever they wanted to, do damage, and your opponent couldn't do anything to them in return. The change is that they now need to destroy an enemy unit before they can use this ability. It's a minor change, but it means that they will be hunting chaff and small units rather than just bouncing off something, doing damage, and then being safe. The bigger changes are to the Thousand Suns. I don't play Thousand Suns, I haven't played against them in many months, so I'm not the best person to explain the changes. But I want you to know that the ritual to make all of your units' clothes fall off and remove armor saves is now a bonus armor penetration of -2 for other Thousand Suns units that shoot at that unit. Bit different, won't make too much of a difference, but it makes some difference if you have a really good armor save. The Space Marines are a codex that have been out a while. They've done okay generally, some detachments more than others. And there's been a little bit of a change to 2 of their Primaris vehicles to increase their transport capacity, so that their 6-man units can have a character attached and still ride into battle. Most other factions don't need this, but it would have been nice to have on the Immolator for the Sisters, as you can't have 5 Sisters infantry and Astrid and Agatha in an Immolator, as that is 7 models and you only have a transport capacity of 6. Their Ironstorm detachment has been toned back a bit. Mercia's weak stratagem is now 2 command points rather than 1, and 2 of their enhancements have lost the aura ability. So you're not going to affect a lot of different tanks, you pick one in the command phase, and that one gets the benefit. So your Ironstorm army will still do very well with vehicles, but you may want to take more supplementary units as you're not going to have pure vehicle madness. Maybe you can still have lots of vehicles, but you want to consider the Gladius task force. That allows all of your units, regardless of what they are, to advance and still shoot, advance and still charge. It does different things different times. Right, let's talk about the Deathwatch. People have been asking Games Workshop, well, I have been asking Games Workshop, hey Games Workshop, where are the updates for the points for the Deathwatch? When are the updated points coming out for the Deathwatch? In what situation do we get to see better points for the Deathwatch? and so on. So please, Games Workshop, if you don't mind, the points. And Games Workshop's all like, right, the points for Deathwatch, the points to bring Deathwatch into line with other factions in the meta, Deathwatch points, those points. Well, there's no changes to the kill teams. The big kill teams that are a combination of a bunch of different units made into one weird unit but with different rules. The Terminators for the Deathwatch are not cheaper, so using regular Space Marine Terminators may be better for you. But we do have a points drop. Deathwatch Veterans are 10 points cheaper for 5. I'll take it. That'll do. Captain Artemis is 10 points cheaper, and the really cool Deathwatch Watchmaster is also 10 points cheaper. He has great rules to let a unit he joins advance and shoot and charge and fall back and shoot and charge, that linchpin of many Deathwatch armies, so it's nice to have him a bit cheaper. He is cheaper because his ability to make one of your opponent's stratagems cost an extra command point will now only happen if the enemy uses that stratagem on a unit that's within 12 inches of the Watchmaster. That's why. Artemis is cheaper because his ability that allows you to use a stratagem a second time no longer happens. It's just going to be, you can use a stratagem on a unit even though it's battle shocked. I wasn't taking either of these characters for that main ability, so I'm feeling pretty good about it. The Watchmaster still has a purpose, and I just used Artemis as a lone murder machine that keeps on coming and gets back up. If I wanted support for a unit, I would get a Watch Captain. They are exactly the same cost at 80 points, despite now being able to make any stratagem 1 command point cheaper, not just the battle tactics. Now, for the Deathwatch, although their index cards have been updated to have the June 2024 watermark, the rules still read the same. Those changes that are main rules changes are not included on the unit card. So either that's an oversight or Games Workshop just hasn't bothered to update the rules as written on the unit. You know, the rules as they are played. That's a pain, and that's going to lead to a lot of players who don't keep up with my videos not knowing the rules as they should be. I mean, it happens to veteran players too. It happened to me last week. It could happen to anyone. There's another change to the Deathwatch, but that is hidden in the Space Marine Frequently Asked Questions document, not in the Deathwatch Index Cards and Frequently Asked Questions document. So this also affects the Space Wolves, Black Templars, and the chapters that have restrictions when using Space Marine units within their own dedicated detachments. Deathwatch can't take Scouts or Tactical Marines at all, even if you're using something like the Gladius Task Force, which has no restrictions. As soon as you take one unit from the Deathwatch Index, no Scouts, no Devastator squads, and no Tactical squads. Really, this is to make Space Marines their own thing, and not just generic a chapter, but minus some good units. There was no reason not to take a Black Templar version of a unit if it was better than your standard Space Marine version. So now, finally, Black Templars are prevented from taking 3 Black Templar Gladiators and 3 Space Marine Gladiators and sticking them all in an Ironstorm detachment. Because it was technically, but not really, bypassing the rule of 3, maximum of 3 of any kind of unit. Well, now we have that, and also we got rid of a weird thing where, oh yeah, Black Templars, they can take Psychers if you're in something like the Firestorm Assault Force. Now they definitely can't. So that's a bit of an irritation for Deathwatch players, but I think most of us were playing it to be lore accurate, where we don't have Space Marine Scouts, because we don't train our own people, we get sent them fully formed by other chapters. The Sisters of Battle points are out. They went up a lot, but that is expected given the power that is flowing out of the Codex. These points changes in red and green are compared to the Codex points, not the points we had in like April 2024. Some factions are given their points after their Codex releases. The Sisters have gotten their points before their Codex is available to all players on Saturday the 22nd of June, this coming Saturday. Their points I'm going to talk about in a separate video. But I want to talk about something else that I don't think any other person who comments on this update is going to notice. Legends. So the Missionary and the Preacher sort of got combined into the Minister and Priest, but really the Missionary is absent. If you still want to use the Missionary, I think you still should be allowed to. It was there in the index. It's not that different. It hasn't appeared in the Legends rules. But the Death Cult Assassins appear, and their unit has changed. They have the Infiltrators rule, and they have Lone Operative. I don't think we've ever seen that on something that isn't a character. Then they also got an extra wound, and they reroll all wound rolls against character units, not just rerolling wound rolls of 1. They're, according to the Legends document, in units of 2 to 4, but that is super cool. No way I'm not using these in casual games. And remember, when they die, you get a miracle dice because of the army special rule. I'm wondering how many people will even notice that the Death Cult Assassins have changed and haven't just been, oh yeah, they're stuck in Legends now. They're better. The Crusaders are in Legends now, but they too got a cool boost. They get an extra attack. They get an extra wound. Damn, those Celestian Sacrosancts are not looking so pleased as they remain on 1 wound despite their own really big shields. The Crusaders can also be joined by more characters. Any character that can join a Battle Sister squad can join the Crusaders. So you can add Palatines, you can add Hospitallers if you wanted. And because of the change to Devastating Wounds, Spiritual Fortitude will now work against Devastating Wounds, Mortal Wounds, and all psychic attacks to give any model in that unit a 4+ Feel No Pain. No character required to be attached. They too are limited to squads of 2 to 4, according to this Legends document, but like the Death Cult Assassins, their points in the points document for the Legend are showing it as a unit of 2, a unit of 4, and a unit of 6. I'm guessing since there are points for a unit of 6, we could take 6, like we could before in the Adepta Sororitas Index. So keep having units of 6 if you wanted. Unusually, they have their points values from like March 2024. Not the more recent, like May 2024, where the cost of 2 was increased compared to the points per model for 4 or 6. Hey, that's what the points document is giving us, despite the units getting way better. We're paying for them like they had 1 wound and weren't as good. Now we're getting them at this price, but better? Okay, good. Maybe Games Workshop's thinking is, if they're a little unbalanced, it won't matter to the people who use them. And they were already very cheap for the role of Action Monkey. Their job was to complete secondary objectives. They did that with these points levels for a very long time before Games Workshop thought maybe that's a problem and they should change it. So you're almost certainly, if you're taking them, going to be taking them in squads of 2 anyway, so just use the points values we have there for a unit of 2. And hey, it means that my army of Munitorum only, no Battle Sisters ladies allowed, is still a viable army. I don't care that these units are in Legends. Your opponent may have some weird preconceptions that because these are rules, but these rules are not in the Codex, then they can't be used in games. A limitation that they don't seem to apply to Forge World units. But these rules are still valid for all 40k games except for officiated tournaments. Don't throw your models away. Now, you don't officially need to ask for your opponent's permission in 10th edition, as you may have done in previous editions, but it may still be worth checking to see if they have any reservations. And because I started seeing loads of, oh, I wonder how we could exploit this sort of things, the rule for suffering and sacrifice in the Codex was a little bit different to the Index. The Index was models in an enemy unit that can target the unit that is suffering and sacrificing themselves must do so. The Codex version says each time an enemy model whose unit was in engagement range of your unit selected target, it must select your unit as the target of its attacks. So you could sort of exploit that to be like, okay, so an enemy unit just doesn't fight or attacks the unit with suffering and sacrifice. Doesn't matter how it was going to be rules as written and faffed about and sorted. It's fine now. It works as it was in the Index. That's the clarification in the Battle Sisters FAQ. Okay, Genestealer Cult. While the Codex is seen as generally bad, the points are a bit all over the place, but these are compared to the Codex points, not what we previously had as Index points. They will be discussed in a separate video. The Nexus has had a little bit more of a nerf. So as I mentioned before, there's a bit of a change in the way that stratagems cost fewer command points rather than 0 command points. The Nexus's ability allowed you to reduce the stratagems by 1 anyway. This FAQ is saying you can only do it once per battle round. So it isn't that every unit that has a Nexus can reduce stratagems by 1, even if they were different stratagems. Only one Nexus will get to use their ability per battle round. But the demolition charge is coming back. It's confirmed to work exactly as I explained it in my frequently asked questions video about demo charges. So you can watch my video on that if you want more clarification. That's page 23 of the core rules update and rules commentary document on one-shot weapons. This also matches how it appears in the various places in the Codex. The regimental reinforcement stratagem has had a bit of a clarification on that, so that any of your Astra Militarum units that come back through Cult Ambush, they are a new unit, they get one-shot weapons back. The Biophagus is mentioned as having an Alchemicus Familiar. How could they forget that? It's the top voted of all of the familiars, the best familiar. So I'm glad they've listed it on their document, otherwise we just wouldn't know that it could have that Alchemicus Familiar. It's much like at the start of the edition where Deathcore of Krieg didn't have a Medipack as an option, but there was an ability on their unit for using a Medipack. We generally figured it out, but it's nice to have it there. And we have confirmation on a way that we played it before, where deep striking, now that it is like you've made a normal move, but you haven't made a normal move, deep striking enemies and units coming from reserve do not remove cult ambush markers. However, because of the proximity of the enemy unit, you won't be able to set up a unit from your cult ambush marker because the enemy is too close. You don't have to take that marker off. It stays there, your unit will just remain in cult ambush. If the enemy then moves closer in their turn, then they will have completed a normal move, so the cult ambush marker is removed because the enemy's moved close enough. So we now have more frequently asked question documents that can be updated by Games Workshop in the future, so we hopefully shouldn't get really stupid things like waiting a year for confirmation on how demo charges work and when and if they come back. Good! A lot of it that we've seen in these documents, because there are so many changes, at least 1,000 changes, I just wasn't going to talk about them all in detail for every faction. I just invite you now to click the link in the description, the one that is below the Ko-fi link. The Ko-fi link is for sending me tip money in appreciation for what I do. It has no PDFs attached, but below that is a link to the Warhammer website where you can see all of these PDF documents and download them and read them for yourselves. On the Warhammer app, these will be updating soon enough. So you will see a video from me very soon analysing the points of the Adepta Sororitas and the Genestealer Cult. Not just the changes, but the overall feel now that we have a Codex and points for the unit. My darlings and viewers, have a great day of 40k.